Thank you, R.G. I would like to say in the beginning that I'd like to thank you for inviting me to share with you in this wonderful season of sharing and giving, and inviting me up for the wonderful meal and the fellowship and to see some old friends. And I'm especially interested that GR invited me up because I think he wanted to let me know just how sober he was, how serene he was, and all this kind of stuff. You know, so like I say, I knew him before. And this afternoon, we come over here in the church and set up a little bit and went back home. And I was sitting there in the easy chairs watching the ball games and all that kind of stuff. And Shirley, she was downstairs working and carrying on and fixing some food. And all of a sudden I heard him call the dog. You know, that's what he called the dog for. He told the dog, said, "Go get me some cigarettes." I said, "Wait a damn minute now, wait a minute." And sure enough, the dog got off the couch, went downstairs, and Rich come back up, cigarettes in his mouth. I said, "I don't believe it." You know, he's got it. And that's what sobriety can do for you. But I would like to take this opportunity before I forget it to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I might forget it at the end, so that's what I'm going to do now. I am an alcoholic. My name is George Smith. I am a member of the New Whiteville group of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing this day. And through God's grace, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and some tough and loving sponsors, I haven't had to have a drink, nor a pill, nor a tablet, nor one of them left-handed cigarettes some of you might smoke, since June the 16th of 1970. And for this, I'm very grateful. I'm not as grateful as I should be, not as grateful as I hope to be, but I'm much more grateful than I used to be. I'm grateful for many, many things. I'm grateful for the people that were here when I came here. The people that put up with me, kind of like R.G. was talking about a while ago, that put up with me when I wasn't ready for this program, and I was one kind of like him that kind of messed it up a little bit. Grateful for the people that loved me when I was unlovable. And I had become unlovable, and you loved me and you welcomed me back. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for a great many people. Grateful for you, because I need you tonight as much as I did then. I'm grateful for the people that's still out there. They're still out there practicing. But if it weren't for them, this program would surely die, and I don't want it to do. I'm grateful to a God of my understanding that allowed me to live long enough to find my own pig pen and come back. And I will try to share a little bit of that gratitude with you tonight. And I'll try to do it as I've been taught to do from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, to share with you a little bit of what I used to be like and what happened and what it's like today. And what it was like with me, I'm sure, was what it was like with many of you. I had a lot of the isms of alcoholism before I ever took a drink. And then, after I did take a drink, for a while, I had some pleasurable times with drinking. And then it turned on me, and for the last 10 years of my drinking, it was hell on earth. And what happened was so simple, I like to miss it altogether. And what it's like today is hard to describe. Or what I'm like, and compared to what I used to be like, is hard to describe. I think that today I'm living a life that I dreamed of for many, many years and didn't know how to find or no way to find it. And I can say truthfully tonight that I'm glad I'm an alcoholic. And I used to hear people say that and I think they were crazy, but I didn't know what they were talking about, but I am. Because I don't believe if I had not been an alcoholic that I would have found this way to live that I have found the way to live this day. And I think the most important part of my story anyway is what happened. Most of the people that I used to know, that they knew what it used to be like, and if I told them I knew what it used to be like, and if they knew me before, they'd say, well, and they see me now, they say, what in the world happened, Joe? You know, and if I got to telling people about that didn't know me what I used to be like, and they'd say, well, what in the world happened? You know, And so that was, the most important part of my story is what happened. What got me from where I was to where I'm at. And as I said, I like to miss all that altogether. Now, when I say that I'm an alcoholic, that automatically makes me powerless over alcohol. And for a long, long time, even around this program, I thought that was the only thing that I was powerless over, was alcohol. Because I had been told, probably like you, by my mother, you're a good son, but you just drink too much. I had been told by my wife, you're a good husband, but you drink too much. I had been told that by employees, you're the best employee I got, but you drink too much. I started being told this by judges. George, you're a good fellow, but you drink too much. I started being told this by psychiatrists. There ain't nothing wrong with you, but you just drink too much. Even my drinking buddy said, damn, George, said, ain't nothing wrong, you just drink too much. So somewhere around the line, I got the idea I drank too much. And if I just didn't drink, everything would be all right. And I'd quit drinking, and nothing got all right. I don't know about you. But if you're like this drunk, and if that's all you do, just quit drinking, then things might get a little better, but you ain't gonna get no better, I did. And that like to kill me with this program also. So I finally come to the conclusion that I was also not only powerless over alcohol, I'm powerless over my thoughts, actions, habits, emotions, the whole deal. And that's the place I had to get to before I could accept this program. And to start off with, I'll tell you a little bit about the background, and I think that maybe had something to do with my alcoholism, I don't know. And I don't know what causes me to be an alcoholic no more than anybody else. I hear this thing about 50% of the alcoholics come from alcoholic homes. Well, all that proves to me the other damn 50% come from good Christian homes like I did. I was born and raised in the eastern part of this state, down close to the coast in Bladen County. Brought up in a loving Christian home, a deeply religious home. I was brought up in a depression, and we were poor. But I guess everybody was poor. We had enough to eat and that kind of stuff. My daddy was a farmer, a sharecropper, and a carpenter. And I was carried to church and Sunday school and camp meetings and this kind of stuff, and it was a very deep religious program. But I know, looking back, that I had a lot of the conflicts that went with me all my life. I felt inferior, I felt different, I felt apart from, I didn't quite measure up. And I know that the first thing that happened, I had a lot of fear. The fear that I wouldn't be successful, the fear that I wouldn't make it, the fear of failure, the fear of success. I had awful lot of fear. I even had a lot of fear of God, because the God I was taught about was a judge and regimental God that was going to punish me for all these things that I did, And there was no alcoholism in my home. Alcohol was not mentioned. In fact, alcohol in my home was right in there, but somewhere between adultery and murder somewhere. If you did that was it. You was going to die and go to hell. And so, I had a lot of fear of alcoholism. And as I said, I had all this inferiority and all this kind of stuff. And I know the first time I really felt this was about the first grade in school, and we used to go to school, and I'd take my lunch in a little paper sack. Some of you might remember, I don't know. It had sweet potatoes and ham biscuits and all that kind of stuff. Good stuff, I'd have it now. But it was greasy, and that kind of stuff. And I see this little postmaster's son, he had a little red box, with a handle on it. I felt different right then. And I started feeling different, and I felt different all the time. And so that was the kind of the background that I was brought up in. And as I said, liquor was a no-no, and I felt different and all this kind of stuff. And then somewhere along about 13 or 14 years of age, I took a drink. I don't know about you, but when I took that drink, I didn't have too many. But when I did, it changed everything. It made me everything that I wanted to be. It made me rich. It got rid of all them freckles, and that hair got pretty, and them breeches turned into pretty breeches, and that 40 cents turned into about $40, and I put my money in the piccolo, and I could dance with them girls. It made me everything that I wanted to be. 32 years later, it had made me everything that I didn't want to be. everything that I said I'd never become, I had become. And that's the way it had done me after 32 years. As I said, after that initial thing, and I think that's the reason I drank for many, many years, for that same feeling, and I never could get that feeling. And I know two other things happened on that first time I ever got drunk. I know my first lie started because I told my mother that I spent the night with a neighbor, and I woke up in a tobacco barn the next morning, and I didn't go to the neighbor, and I felt guilty. And I told lies all the time I drank, and I felt guilty, and it stayed with me. But I did manage to get on through school, and shortly after school, got in WW2, as Archie says, and went through 4 years in service and came back out in 1946 and married a little girl from my hometown that I'd been going with since school, and moved to the town of Hamlet, North Carolina, which is a railroad town, to make my fame and fortune with the railroad, and to do things that normal people do, to have a home, to have a profession, to go to church, be an outstanding citizen, and to accomplish some things. And I did. For the next 12 years, I accomplished a lot of those things. I was like a lot of alcoholics. I wanted to succeed, and it wasn't after too long before I was promoted to conductor. It wasn't too long before I was promoted to a yard master, which is a supervisor job on the railroad. And the wife was a nurse, and she was working, and we'd accumulated a lot of things. I had at that point, a 10-room brick home. I had a new automobile, and the wife had one. I had a new pickup truck. I bird hunted, deer hunted, played golf, fished, and belonged to all the right clubs. American Legion, the Moose, all the country club, all them drinking clubs. Now I was a joiner. I joined everything you could join, and even went to church some, And all this time, I'm doing what I thought was social drinking, I look back on it now, and I know it was forced control drinking. But my alcoholism was progressing then, and I was doing all the things that we do. I was kind of lying about the drinking and hiding the drinking, I'd have me a little bit up in the refrigerator, and I'd have some in the cabinet. But I also had me some, the wife didn't say too much about the drinking if I drank normal, 1 or 2 drinks or whatever. But when you start getting 5 or 6 drinks and you don't want to eat yet, and you want another one, and you're at a party or somewhere and you're getting another one, and they kind of look at you kind of squinch-eyed and this kind of stuff, and their lip pokes out about that far and all this kind of stuff. And, so I just hide my liquor, and I'd have it on the seat of the truck. And I'd have me some out there where I kept my dog feed, and I'd feed them 9 times a night. I had the best damn dead dogs in the world, and if they didn't bark enough, I'd flip the lights on out there where they'd bark and run and give me a drink, But there wasn't nothing wrong with that. That was just to keep down arguments and stuff, and, I was working every day and, never been on trouble with the law or nothing. And, the wife kept saying a little something about the drinking, but, I wasn't no alcoholic. It wasn't, I deserved that. I was making a good living, and my denial system was just as high as this building, It's kind of like the joke to tell about the old drunk that got drunk, went to sleep, and set the bed on fire. Set the bed on fire, and it was smoking, and some of his buddies come by and saw the smoke, and they run there and got old John, said, "John, get up." So he set the bed on fire. He said, "Don't blame that on me. It was on fire when I got in it," That's about how my denial system would have been if he'd have told me I had a problem with alcohol then. Well, no way, And this was in 1960. In 1970, 10 years later, I came to, and I was strapped down, and I didn't know where I was at, or how I got there. And I got a good friend that said, if you come to and you don't know where you're at and how you got there, you're in the wrong place. But I was in the right place. I was strapped down in the Hamlet Hospital, where I had been many, many times before, and I didn't know how I got there. Finally found out a little later on, the law took me over there. And that day when I came to, I didn't have that job with the railroad. I didn't have that wife. I didn't have that 10-room house. I didn't have no automobile. I didn't have any driver's license. I hadn't played golf in 3 years because my doctor told the man at the golf course, he might as well sell his clubs because he won't never play no more golf. I hadn't been hunting in 3 years because I pawned my shotgun. I had been in many, many hospitals. I had been up at this place called Butner for several times. I had done a little internship up here in Raleigh, this place called Dix Hill. They call it Dorothy Dix now. You know, I had been in halfway houses, and I had been in jail over 150 times. DUIs, driving with license revoked, public drunk, disturbing the peace, vagrancy, loitering, what have you. 10 years, I had tried to find an easier, softer way. 10 years, I had tried to find half measures. 10 years, I had held on to old ideas, and it would not work. I had come to you people approximately 8 years before then, and I didn't have what it took to get this program. And you know, I hear and we read, and the only requirement for membership in this program is a desire to quit drinking. Well, I want to quit drinking. But then on down there a little bit further, it says if you have what we want and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. And that part I didn't have. I was not willing to go to any length to get what you had. As I said, it wouldn't work. And you know, I hear some things around now. I go to a lot of meetings, and I hear some things that kind of bother me. I hear this saying says, fake it till you make it. I don't like that. That ain't what my book says. If you'll find any page in that book, anywhere, that says fake it till you make it, I'll eat it. I ain't found it. And so don't fake it. I faked it till I like to die. If you ain't serious about this program, it ain't gonna work. Or it didn't work for me, and I don't believe it's gonna work for you if you ain't willing to go to any length. And that's the reason I didn't make this program in the beginning. And I don't recommend that because if you can come in this program and get sober and do just fine. You don't have to do it like me and RG done it. And I could tell you many things that happened in those 10 years. I could tell you about the wife leaving. I could tell you about losing this job at the railroad. I could tell you about going to treatment and trying to, for all the wrong reasons, and getting this job back. You know, I could tell you about getting this job back and going to work, under the influence one night, and I worked something kind of like an air controller's tower. It's a very important job. Now, I didn't come in contact with a lot of people, but I talked to people all over countries, dispatching and building trains. I could tell you about going back to work one night after being off a couple of days and having a lot to drink in me, and took some to work with me. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I had trains supposed to be going toward Wilmington, and going toward Charlotte. And I had the ones going toward Columbia, I had them going toward Raleigh. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, I just left them, said the hell with them, and they fired me again, and they kind of frowned on that. I could tell you about all these hospitals and the geographical cures and all this kind of stuff, but you all know about that. Some of you's been there. I could tell you about winding up back in the little town of Hamlet after all the geographical cures that went all over the states and everywhere else. And I think that was out of fear too. Most of us wind up where we start off. There wasn't no way in the hell I was going way off out in Texas or somewhere where I didn't know somebody, So I wound up back where I started, living in a little flea bag hotel. And I could tell you about coming out of that hotel. This little town that I had been in for 25 years. And walking up and down the street after been on a, 4 or 5 week drunk. Same clothes I'd had on, not shaved, hair long. I become a hippie before it was popular. I was scared to shave. I was cutting my throat. And walk up and down the street, and bum a quarter off of this one, 50 cents off of this one. And see a good bag, get $1 off of him, And these are people that used to work for me. I used to play golf with and go to church with and visit their homes and then visit mine. And they said, what the hell's wrong with old George? And they give you the 50 cents a quarter. And I didn't care. All I wanted was enough to get over to that liquor store, to get something to cut out these boogers and shakes. And it was before liquor store time, I stopped by the A&P, and get me one of those 98-cent bottles of Boar's Heads or 2020 or something to get enough to get a well. I could tell you about even getting thrown out of the hotel. Now, it's hard to get thrown out of a flea bag hotel, But I would come to in jail there one morning, and the fella had my bags packed out in the jail, and he didn't want me back in the hotel. So I found a buddy out on the edge of town. We got some of them in every town, I found a buddy there. His wife had left him. I can tell you about staying out there with him for 4 or 5 months. And waking up out there in the morning, the night before, they're having a hell of a big time. They're cooking fish, and they're having barbecues, and everything's fine, and the liquors are flowing, and, you wake up the next day, and everybody's gone, And, Lord, you look around and you start looking for corners. Now, I know y'all know what corners are, but, you start looking for corners. And you can't find no corners, and you walk in the bathroom, and there's a old bottle of shaving lotion. You say, oh, hell, that's 12%. And you start pulling it out, and it won't pull out fast enough, so you just knock the top off of it, and you pull it out, and you drink it, Don't taste too good, but you smell like hell, and it does pretty good, And you see an old bottle of rubbing alcohol sitting there, and it's got them little crossbones on it. And you say, well, hell, I ain't gonna drink with just a little bit, it ain't gonna hurt me, And you drink a little bit of that, and you say you won't do that. I said, I'll never do it too. But you do that, and you get a little bit better. Legs quit, and the bed quits a jumping, and the table quits a flying, and directly you hear an old car coming, and they drive up in the yard, and you go to the window and you peep out the shade. You got shades pulled, you peep out the shade, and you see them getting out of the car, and you see some of your buddies, and they got them old brown paper sacks sticking out of the pocket. How my Santa Claus done come? Some of you know what the hell I'm talking about. I hear you laughing. You've done been there, Well, that was kind of the way it was going, and it was getting worse, and it was getting worse, and I even moved out of that hotel, and, made another little geographical cue, got me an apartment across town, and to get away from them drunks in the hotel. Got me another little job. Had me a job as a plumber's helper. And I was doing pretty good. I worked for about 5 months and didn't drink none. Went to about 1 meeting a week, and I was trying to get straight again. But then it come a bad time. It come my birthday, and that was on Saturday, and that was payday. And that's bad if you ain't good and sober, I'll tell you. And so me and this lady friend that I met in the AA was going to celebrate my birthday. She'd been sober about 2 months, too. Or hadn't drank nothing about 2 months. And so we celebrated my birthday. And to make a long story short, I got on a 10-day drunk. And that's when I wound up in that hospital for that again. And I stayed there 7 or 8 days and dried out. And I came out of the hospital that day, and I walked back into that old apartment. And it was a typical drunk's apartment. And, that was the day that I hit what I hoped was my bottom. Now, I had been around you people a long time, in and out. And I'd heard you talk about bottoms. And somehow I thought you was talking about a physical bottom. And I didn't know how much further I have to go, physically. Because at this time I had cirrhosis of the liver, and I'd had my doctor tell me that, if you drink any more, you're going to die. And 3 months later, I'd be back in the hospital. And I'd slept in old cars, and, under buildings, and them old railroad cars over there, with the passenger station and that kind of stuff. And, and I had tried all the deals that you people had told me, And I'd come to you people, and I'd sit on the back with the losers and talk about the winners, and, and do my thing and go on out. And I was desperately searching for this thing that I couldn't find. And I knew you had it because I could see it. And I didn't know what I was missing and didn't know how to get it, this thing, this hole that was in here, this thing that was missing, I didn't know what it was. I'd come to some Sunday mornings in jail. And it would be springtime, and the birds are singing, and it's nice, and I hear the people upstairs are laughing, and the church bells is ringing. And maybe Sunday a few ago, I was over in that church, desperately trying to do this. And, I'm sick, and, I'm laid on an old stinking cot, and the commodes are running. And, I know, that somehow, with a few days, if I don't drink no more, I'm going to get physically well. But that wasn't what was wrong. this thing in here, this deal inside. I couldn't find nothing to get that well. And you know, I'd get dry for a few months, and I'd go out and I'd get another job, and I'd get me a new pair of pants, and I'd get some more clothes, and I'd get this, and I'd get kind of dressed up, you know. But I never went to God's beauty parlor. I never got cleaned up on the inside. Nothing never changed. Things would get better, and I didn't get any better, you know. And that day when I walked back into that old apartment, you know, was the day I think that I hit my bottom. Because when I walked into that apartment that day, I was just as helpless as I was the day that my mother born me in the world. I had gone the whole cycle, you know, from some kind of childhood to adulthood and back to, I was just like a child that day. I was completely powerless over my thoughts, actions, habits, and I was helpless as that little baby was. And what does a baby do when he's wet, hungry? You know, he cries out. And that's what I did that day. Beside that old bed that I had everything a drunk could put on it for 10 days. I cried out to a God that I didn't know. And I don't know what I said, but I know what I said, just God help me. And he did. And the window curtains didn't fly up and down, the bells didn't ring. But way back down in the deep recesses of this soul somewhere, a moment of truth had come. And I had become childlike. And a little flicker of hope came. And the greatest thing that happened was all this great fear that I had somehow kind of went away. Not all of it, but a lot of it went away. And I felt different when I got up. And I felt at ease. And I felt at peace. And for a long time in this program, when I heard you people talk about spiritual experiences, I thought maybe that's what I had. And I don't know that that's what I had. And I've come to realize today that what I think it is and what I say is my own opinion. I think it was this relief I got from a total giving up, a total surrender that we have to have before it's going to work. I think that day, down on my knees beside that bed, I was willing and became willing to go to any length to get this program. I became willing to take those first 3 steps, and I think I took them to the best of my knowledge at that time right there. Up until that point, I had took the first part of the first step, and that's as far as I went. I'd admit I was powerless over alcohol, but that was it. You couldn't tell me my life was unmanageable. I didn't want nothing to do. I didn't understand God. But when I did that, as I said, this fear went away, and I felt a calmness and a peace that I never knew before. And I lay down and I slept that night. And that was a relief because I didn't know how long I was going to stay in the apartment. I didn't have no job. I had 14 cents. I didn't have nothing else. But a sudden relief came, and with that came a sudden relief of change of attitude. And I'll tell you a little bit about the change of attitude. That next Monday, I went down and a buddy of mine used to work with me on the railroad, and he'd quit and opened up a used car business. And I walked down to his little used car place that day, and he was building a little shed over his place, and I helped him build a shed. And I hung around there all week with him. It was just someplace to go. And he understood what was happening with me, and, you know, I answered the telephone and cut the grass and washed some cars and just hung around there all week. And that Saturday evening, I never will forget it, as long as I'm just as fresh as I'm standing here. Walking his little trailer he had for an office, and he reached in his pocket and he gave me $10. He said, "George, here's $10. I said, you might need some cigarettes." And he knew I need some cigarettes. I've been bumming off him all week, you know. And I went on up to that little apartment up there across to the store, the colonial store, and I went in there and bought me little things I had to have. And I was scared I didn't have enough money. And I walked up to the checkout counter. The girl rung it up, and it come to $9.90, And I walked on across that little apartment and put it up. I put that mess up, and I sat down at that table where I'd been drunk at for 10 days, just a few short period before. And for the first time in my life, I thank God for letting me have what I had, instead of being ungrateful for what I didn't have. And my thought went something like this. If that boy would have given me $50 that day, I might have took 20 of it and bought groceries. I might have took the other 30 and got drunk. The God that I knew then and the God that I know now gives me exactly what I need when I need it. Not what I want when I want it. Because I still, to this day, do not know what's good, the best for me. And if I start wanting and knowing what's best for me, then I'm not doing what I think is God's will. And with this attitude, I got back in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's the first time I got in it instead of being around it. I've done the things that you told me to do. I moved from the back to the front, like you talk about. You ever see me in an AA meeting? I don't care where it is. I'm going to be on the front somewhere or close. I don't know if it makes any difference, but that's where I'm going to be. Because I like to be there. And you know, I got me a sponsor. I got a sponsor before then, you know. I got me a book, and I started reading, I started learning, you know, and I didn't have nowhere to go, you know, and I got me a good sponsor, too. You know, I got one of these sponsors that wouldn't tell me, but I kind of used him, too, you know. I got me a good sponsor, been so about 7 or 8 years, you know. And, you know, I didn't have no car, and they said, if you ain't got no way, you know, maybe your sponsor will take you, you know. And he would. He went to a lot of meetings, but, you know, I'd hook him, you know. He'd come back and get me, and we'd go to a meeting, and he'd come back and take me home. And just before I got out, I said, John, where are we going tomorrow night? You know, he's a pretty good sponsor. He ain't going to tell you I ain't going to no meeting. I'm going to watch a ball game. And so he'd, you know, we'd go to meetings. And I started going to meetings, and I started trying to work these steps as the best I knew how. And I started letting these steps work in my life. And it started working. And I got a little bit better. And the changes started. And I finally got a little job. Worked with that man at the used car lot for a while. And I got a little better job and a little better job. And things started slowly but surely getting better. But they were slow. But in the meantime, I started getting a little better. Just a little bit. I started getting a little bit honest. And I started getting a little bit grateful. And I started getting a little bit humble. And I fell in love with this program. And I fell in love with you people. And you know, when I first came in, even the last time I was talking to some of the people, and I said, I still don't quite understand this God bit. And they said, you don't have to understand it. Says, if you ain't got one of your own, says, use ours so you can find one. And I did, and I finally found a God of my understanding in this program. You know, and things started getting better. And I got a little sign on my desk now that says, what a man is contributes much more to his happiness than what he has. And I found that to be true. And as I said, things got better, and after being sober a couple of years through no fault of mine, and you know, there's something in the big book that says there's nothing the more ensure your sobriety is working with other alcoholics. You know, that's part of our program, that's part of our recovery. And God must have thought I needed a lot of them because he put me in the field of alcoholism, you know, back in 1972. I'm still in it today. And I went to work in the field of alcoholism, and I started working on my program and this kind of stuff. And after about 3 years sober, I had a lot of apprehension and a lot of guilt and a lot of stuff about this first wife, you know, that had walked off and left me. And I think she left me for the reason that a lot of wives leave alcoholics. That if you love me enough, you'll quit your drinking and everything will be okay. And it was not, I was a sick man, and I loved her as much as I was capable of loving her, but I was so sick I couldn't give up the booze. And I had a lot of guilt about this, and after 3 years sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I remarried this first wife. And I know today that alcoholism is a family disease. It had affected her. Because sometimes, you know, when the water gets still and the boat keeps rocking, there's something wrong, you know. And after 18 months, the boat was still rocking. And I had to turn and walk away from this marriage again. And it was a bad time. But I had you people, and I turned to you, and you loved me. And I had a sponsor and that kind of stuff, and I got through that, you know. And I found that in this program, that every bad thing that happens to me, God always opens up new doors. There's always another door open if I'll just wait for it. And out of this thing come one of the best things that ever happened to me. Shortly after that, I met another lady that has been a major part in my life for the last 10.5 years. I see this lady, and I was working around the Pinehurst area, and I'd see her come in the clinic over there, and then I started seeing her in AA meetings, and I finally, I can tell it now, but she introduced herself to me. I was at an out-of-town meeting then. I was living in Hammond. I was in Aberdeen. That's about 40 miles up there. And she walked up and asked me, did I ever go to any out-of-town meetings? And I said, well, what the hell do you think I'm at now, And I met this lady, and finally at first I loved this lady as another alcoholic. And then I loved this lady as a person. And then finally I just loved this lady, And we were both then about 5 years sober, 1976, and we were married. And this is one of the most beautiful things that ever happened to me. This sharing with another alcoholic. And this was a beautiful woman, and she taught me many, many things about this program. And we talk about sanity now. I never had any children. And I married this lady, and she had 6 children, so I won't completely restore the sanity after that now, And, these children, and they were typical children, they weren't exactly like I'd have ordered them if I'd have ordered them myself, But I accepted these children, and today, these children and I have a beautiful relationship, and we've been through some hard times with these children. And this lady, as I said, taught me much about life. She taught me much about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some of you in here, Gordon, and a few know this lady. And she had more compassion and more love and more tolerance and understanding than a person I've ever known. And she went to work in the field of alcoholism too, and we worked together. And we counseled together and worked together, and we went to meetings together, and we went to a meeting. I ain't like some of these counselors that get in the field of alcoholism and could go to meetings. And we went 6 and 7 nights a week, and it was a beautiful life, and we did this, and apprehensions, about when I went into the field of alcoholism, I'd like to tell you about, because when I went into the field of alcoholism, I didn't know a lot about counseling. I didn't know a lot about anything, really except, just sharing my story with other people. And I went into the field of alcoholism, and I started going to all these schools and seminars, and I went to Rutgers, and I went all over the United States, and Nevada, and all these places, and I hear these people, talking about how to treat drunks and treat alcoholics, and they had all these theories, and they had all this, and they had all of that. But I never heard none of them mention God, And so it kind of bothered me, and then when a person would come in, and I'd share with them a little bit like I always do, and they'd finally get around to ask me and say, well, George, how in the world did you ever get sober? And I said, I hit my bottom and I got in there and I got sober. I was scared to tell them I got on my knees and got sober, and that's the way I got sober. I stay sober trying to practice these principles to the best of my ability through this program. And that's the way it was happening, and I heard a lady talk one time at a convention, and she said, if God runs you out of this program, booze will run you right back in, And I found that to be true. And so from that day to this, I've never had any hesitation about sharing how I got sober with anybody, anywhere, anytime, they want to tell me. And I'm not ashamed of that today. I don't have to be, and I hope you don't. And I said, this lady taught me many, many, many things, and we shared together and this kind of stuff. And, and life was beautiful, and we've had a beautiful relationship and a beautiful marriage. And approximately 2 years ago, that's November 2 years ago, this lady had a major heart attack and like to die, and thought she was going to die that night. But she didn't die. And for the last 2 years, 2.5 years, she's been in and out of hospitals, or was in and out of hospitals, and been in Duke 4 times. It was a very, very rough 2 years. And it was the 2 years that we grew. They say sometimes that pain is what makes you grow. And this lady, as I said, was in and out of the hospital for 15 or 20 times. She'd be home a while and in the hospital a while. And we grew very close. And that was in this period of time that I really learned to wear the world like a loose garment. That I really grew up, and this woman taught me more and more about acceptance. because she knew she could never get well. And the little things that we used to take for granted started meaning so much. And the big things that we strive for sometimes become very, very unimportant. The little things like sitting out in the yard and watching the butterflies and just being able to be outside and maybe going downtown and going to the shopping center or going to the beauty parlor and getting your hair fixed. And these little things become very important to this lady, you know. And we become very, very close. And she suffered a lot. And then on October the 21st, this year, she was in a hospital, and God wanted a little more love in his kingdom. And Clarice died. And I went through all the emotions, all the why me's and all this kind, and I didn't want to lose her. And I became very selfish, you know, and I wanted my way again, and I wanted it for me. And then out of that, you know, I got to looking and become very grateful that this lady had shared the last 2 years of her life with me. And out of that, too, came a very beautiful thing. I saw the most beautiful outpouring of love and understanding and unconditional love from you people, some of you people in this room today. And I had people from all over, you know, up and down the East Coast, you know, call and come and send cards. And it was a beautiful thing, a beautiful experience. Now, the death wasn't beautiful, don't get me wrong, but that was a beautiful experience to me, you know, and I've gained something from that, you know, and I lost and I gained. And I'll share a little something with you just prior to that for a couple of 3 weeks. A little old boy came to me, and he was one of these unlovable boys, 25 years old. He had been diagnosed schizophrenic and all kind of stuff, and he had been in some group homes, and his father and mother, they had kind of pushed him aside, and he'd gotten alcohol, got in some trouble with his alcohol and drugs, and he took everything, and he come to me, and he said, George, says, I got to do something. I said, I want to quit drinking. And I did with him like I did with everybody else. I just shared a little bit with him, and I got him into a little treatment, and he got into AA, you know, and he started coming. And, you know, and I didn't think much about it, and I didn't give the boy much hope. You know, he was one of them, again, like, you know, sometimes we get smart and we say, oh, hell, he ain't gonna pay him too much attention. And, you know, he looked bad. You know, you seen these drunks that looked bad. His hair was all kind of waves. And, you know, but that night, that we had visitation, and there was a lot of people there, you know, from all walks of life, a lot of sobriety there. And they were sharing with me. And I looked up, and here come Jeff. And he had a suit of clothes on, and he had a tie on, his hair was fixed. And he walked in there, and he grabbed me, and he says, Uncle George, I love you. And that was it. That was the thing I remember about that whole deal. And I remember these other people that I know, but that stuck out in my mind. What had I given this boy? I had not given him anything except a little bit of unconditional love and sharing, you know. And that's what this program is all about, to me, sharing and caring. And I'll give you one more little example. I was working in Rockingham there, you know, and this old boy, I had been working with him quite a while, and he was a painter. You know, he's your typical drunk, you know. And old Jerry, he'd paint a house, and, you know, he'd get straightened out, he'd get him some money, and he'd get drunk, and, you know, he'd spend that, and he'd get drunk, and he'd get in jail and all this kind of stuff. And I worked with him for a long time, and I went, he come by the office one day, and he said, George, how about meet me over in court till I got in a quarrel with Mama, and she had took out papers and blah, 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 and went on. And so I went over to court that day, and Jerry's case come up, and I don't know what, it come up, and the judge just give him to me. You ever had anybody give you a drunk? You know, that's a hell of a thing. They just give it to me. Say, I just give him to George, you know. Well, I done what I always done. I got him right in AA, you know. And he got to doing, you know, pretty good there for a week or two. And he come by the office one morning, and he said, George, you got one of them little books, one of them little black. I said, you talking about a 24-hour book? I said, man, yeah, I got one. I keep them in my office. I reached over there and got him and give it to him. You know, that's part of my treatment, too. I said, well, maybe old Jerry gonna make it this time. You know, he was right. And it walked on for a week or two, and I didn't see Jerry. You know, one morning I went to work. The secretary said, somebody they won't see you. You know, and I said, I wonder who that is. Well, there's old Jerry. And he got them old overalls on, and he's got scratches on his face, and he ain't shaved. And he said, Joe, I gotta see you. I said, oh, Lord, you know. No way he wanted. He went on in the office, you know, and Jerry said, Joe, I gotta have $5. You know, so I got something in the pond. If I don't get it out, I'm gonna be in trouble, and blah, blah, blah. You know, I said, man, I ain't just joking over $5, you know. I said, Jerry, I ain't got no $5. And we talked on a little bit, and he come on down to $2. He said, Joe, let me have $2. You know, and I said, man, I ain't got no $2. And I said to myself, I ain't gonna get this fella no $2 to get no blind with, you know. And directly, we talked on a minute, and he put the con on the con. He said, Joe, let me have $2. You know how it is. And I did know how it was. And I got up and I got $2 damn out of my pocket, and I gave it to Jerry, you know. You know, he'd go get his wine with or whatever the hell he wanted. You know, I didn't make no difference to me, you know. But another beautiful thing happened. Another thing happened. You see, I was ready for Jerry to go. You know, I had some of them important people I was going to see. Them, you know, didn't smell drunks, you know, to talk to. You know, and we walked to the door. And a beautiful thing happened. Jerry put his arm around me and looked me straight in the eye. And he said, George, I love you. And I felt just like I did the day I got off of my knees off of that bed. The love of one drunk for another. The love of one human being for another. This is what you got here that you'll never find nowhere else. And I hope and pray to God that I never get too sober or too smart or too intelligent or too anything to forget what this program is all about, to forget where I come from, to forget that all we got to give is this unconditional love to another drunk. And when they come to you all messed up and they're sick and you say he ain't gonna make it, it ain't up to you whether he gonna make it or not. It ain't up to me. All the requirement is to give him this unconditional love. And that's all we do, you know. And that's what that I give this little boy that come to this wife's funeral, you know, was unconditional love. And I've got it returned many, many times to me. And that's what this program is all about. And that's what this program has given me. It has given me a way of life. It has given me a God of my understanding. It has given me a little bit of peace. It has given me a way of life. It has taken away a lot of the fear and the frustrations and the anxieties and the anger. And it's taken away some of this loneliness, the awful loneliness that we catch ourselves in. You know, I've never seen any more lonely a person than a lonely alcoholic. And he don't have to be by himself. He can be in a crowd. I could be in a crowd and be a lonely person. And it has left me with many, many things. It has left me at peace with me. It has left me at peace with you. It has left me at peace with the God of my understanding. It's also left me with a responsibility. A responsibility to be an example of what Alcoholics Anonymous can be. It has left me the responsibility to share this unconditional love any place, anytime, anywhere. When the hand of aid reaches out, I want to be there. Or whether it's in my office, or whether it's at 2 o'clock in the morning, or whatever it is. Or whether I'm picking up ashtrays or charity meetings, or what I'm so feebly trying to do tonight. It's my responsibility to carry this message any way I can carry it. And this is what this program has meant to me. And this program is my life. It is my life today. As I said, I just went through some times. And this is the first time I've talked since then. It ain't easy. But I know that this is where I'm supposed to be. I know that that lady is with me. And she's gone where she belongs. And it was a beautiful thing. 6 strong hands of AA carried her last meeting. And that's the way she wanted. And I buried her with a 16-year chip in her pocket. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the times that we had. Instead of being ungrateful that she's gone. Because I got you people. And I can go on. And this is the way life is. You know, and this is the way I take this program. And I'd like to leave you with a little thing that I heard several years ago that meant a lot to me. It kind of amplifies the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was when one of our presidents had to resign. And I heard him make a little farewell speech that day, and I don't know where it was, but what he said made an impression on me. I'll never forget it. And you've probably heard it before, but it went something like this. He says, only when you have been in those deep, dark valleys do you remember how beautiful it is on top of the mountain. And I know that I, and each and every one of you, has walked in those deep, dark valleys. And slowly but surely, one day at a time, with your hand in mine, I'm slowly trudging out of them valleys. I know I'll never get to the top, and I hope I never do. But I also know, as sure as I'm standing here, that you will never let my hand go. And I pray to God, I'll never let your hand go.